Hello, it's Jim Hutchens for the Jerusalem Connection Spot Report for this week. Well, as you have watched the news, the offensive on the part of Israel into Gaza continues. And hopefully it will indeed continue. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that it will in fact continue until the security and the peace of the Israelis is secured. So we can expect an ongoing dealing with the Palestinians, Hamas especially, in Gaza. I think that this is important in light of the fact that there are those who are saying that this is merely a prelude to a much broader conflict that will exist within the Middle East against Israel. As a matter of fact, I'm reminded of the words of the former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Kissinger was the Secretary of State of President Nixon from 1973 to 1977, and it was during that time this Yom Kippur War. Kissinger said at that time that during this war, Israel should bleed a little bit. They should bleed. That was a statement he made, and Israel did bleed. They bled profusely. As a matter of fact, Golda Meir got on the telephone to President Nixon and said, "Sir, if you don't help us, if you don't resupply us, if you don't grant us new armaments," he said, or she said, "we'll have to use nuclear weapons against our enemies." Well, President Nixon fortunately intervened, sent armaments back, and the Israelis defeated their Arab enemies at that time. So I've always taken what Kissinger said with a grain of salt, but he said in 2012, he said a very startling statement, and there were a number of people who agreed with him. Henry Kissinger, let me read some excerpts from the Kavkaz Center, KavkazCenter.com. Henry Kissinger and 16 American intelligence agencies agree that in the near future, Israel will no longer exist. No longer exist. The New York Post quotes Kissinger word for word, quote, "In 10 years, there will be no more Israel." That was 2012. According to his prediction, by 2022, Israel will be history. The U.S. intelligence community agrees, though perhaps not on the precise 2022 expiration date. The 16 U.S. intelligence agencies agree that Israel cannot withstand the coming pro-Palestinian juggernaut consisting of the Arab Spring, the Islamic Awakening, and the rise of Iran. They go on to say, in order to normalize relations with the 57 Islamic countries, the report suggests that U.S. will have to follow its own national interests and pull the plug on Israel. That's what will happen within the next 10 years. Not only will Israel cease to exist, but it will cease to have the support of the United States. We're leaning in that direction now, as you well know. Interestingly, neither Henry Kissinger nor the authors of the U.S. intelligence report give any sign that they're going to mourn the demise of Israel. This is remarkable, given that Kissinger is Jewish and has been viewed as a friend, if occasionally a tough friend, of Israel, and that all Americans, including those who work for intelligence agency, have been influenced by the strong pro-Israel media. Finally, they conclude Israel has reached the end of its shelf life. More and more American politicians and representatives of the U.S. elite, as well as ordinary Americans, share this opinion. I would challenge the fact that ordinary Americans share this opinion. Ordinary Americans are very pro-Israel. The Congress has been predominantly, but it's fast moving toward the fact, really, that the Democrats do not support Israel. Well, that's the politically elite's prediction. That's kind of their last word, if you will. But is it God's last word? I don't think so. I'm reminded of the text that's given to us in Zechariah chapter 14. Let me read the first few verses of that. A day of the Lord, Zechariah 14:1, a day of the Lord. This is the day of God's unleashing of his all-consuming wrath on those who oppose him and his plans and his people. There's a day coming. The day of the Lord is coming when your plunder, Israel's plunder, will be divided among you. This is what he says. God says this, I will gather all nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. This is the battle of Armageddon. And it takes place just before the Lord's return. I will gather all nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The armies of the world that God brings together are massed at Megiddo. That's north, up near Haifa, just east of Haifa. That's where they're massed. They move south and they take Jerusalem in siege. I will gather all nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, the women raped. Half the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. Now listen to this, what happens now. Then, and only then, Yahweh will go out and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Hallelujah. And it concludes in verse 5 by saying, then Yahweh my God will come and all his holy ones with him. That's us, folks. That's God's last word. No, Israel will not cease to exist. It will look like they're going to cease to exist. But God says this, I will gather all nations to Jerusalem, and then Yahweh will go out and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle, and on that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Hallelujah. That's God's last word. Let's not take the politically elite, what they say, as being binding. That's not the last word. God has given us his last word. Till next week, Od Ki Yavo Shiloh, or until Messiah comes, Yivaraka Yahweh. God bless you.